The slave trade's devastating impact on Ghana's population and kingdoms. Imagine a village at dawn, fire still warm, children still sleeping, mothers grinding grain. Then silence, then screaming. By midday, that village is gone. Not burned, not abandoned, emptied. The people, chained, marched to the coast, loaded onto ships, will never return. This was not a rare tragedy. This was Tuesday. For over 3 centuries, the land we now call Ghana hemorrhaged human life on a scale almost too vast to comprehend. Today, we are going to look that horror directly in the face. The numbers, the kingdoms, the consequences, and refuse to look away. Between the late 1400s and the mid-1800s, an estimated 12 to 15 million Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic. Of those, historians estimate that the region of modern-day Ghana, then home to powerful kingdoms along the Gold Coast, contributed hundreds of thousands, possibly over 1 million souls, to that catastrophic total. But those numbers only count the people who survived the Middle Passage. For every person who arrived in the Americas, scholars estimate that roughly 1 to 2 more died during raids, during the brutal marches to the coast, or aboard the overcrowded, disease-ridden ships. The true human cost was almost double what the ledgers recorded, and the ledgers were kept meticulously. The Europeans kept records. The Africans kept memories. To understand what the slave trade did to Ghana's kingdoms, you have to understand that it did not arrive from outside as a clean, simple evil. It entangled itself in existing rivalries, in politics, in ambition, and it corrupted everything it touched. The Ashanti Empire, the most powerful kingdom in the region, rose to dominance in the early 1700s, in part because of the slave trade. Under founders like Osei Tutu and later Opoku Ware, the Ashanti expanded aggressively, conquering neighboring peoples. Many of those conquered people were sold, traded to European merchants at Elmina, Cape Coast, and a dozen other fortresses along the coast in exchange for guns, iron, cloth, and gold. This is one of the most painful truths of this history. African rulers participated in the trade, but context matters enormously. The arrival of European demand and European weapons fundamentally reshaped the political logic of the entire region. Kingdoms that refused to trade enslaved people found themselves outgunned by those who did. The choice, for many rulers, was enslave or be enslaved. European capitalism had engineered a trap, and entire civilizations fell into it. The Fante states along the coast became middlemen, negotiating between European traders and inland kingdoms, profiting and also suffering. The GA people near present-day Accra watched their coastlines become corridors of captivity. The Dagomba, the Gonja, nearly every ethnic group in the region either sold captives, lost captives, or both. The demographic wound was staggering. Historians who have studied pre-colonial African population data estimate that the slave trade may have cut West Africa's population growth by half over 2 centuries. Villages that should have grown, didn't. Families that should have formed, couldn't. The young and the strong were systematically removed. What remained were the elderly, the very young, and the grief. Agricultural production suffered. Warfare increased, because raiding for captives became profitable. Social trust collapsed between neighboring communities. Ethnic hostilities that the slave trade inflamed did not die when the trade ended. Some of those fractures are visible even today. The Ashanti Empire itself, though powerful, was distorted by the trade. Enormous energy, military, economic, political, went into raiding and warfare rather than into building, farming, teaching, or healing. When the British finally abolished the trade and then outlawed slavery entirely in their territories, the Ashanti found themselves holding an economy built around a commodity that was no longer legal to export. The structural damage was profound. Along Ghana's coast, 15 major slave castles and forts still stand today. Cape Coast Castle, Elmina Castle, built by the Portuguese in 1482, the oldest European building in sub-Saharan Africa. Fort Christiansborg, now Ghana's seat of government. Inside these castles, below the governor's chapel, below the banquet halls where Europeans drank wine and danced, were the dungeons. Dark, windowless, packed with human beings who had done nothing except be born in the wrong place at the wrong moment in history. Estimates suggest that at Elmina alone, over 12 million Africans passed through those dungeons over the course of the trade. There is a door at Cape Coast Castle that Ghanaians call the door of no return. Captives were walked through it directly onto the ships. Most never saw their homeland again. In 1998, Ghana's government renamed it, officially, the Door of Return, a symbolic act, an invitation to the diaspora, a refusal to let that door be only a wound. The transatlantic slave trade ended, legally, in the 19th century. But its consequences did not end. The population loss reshaped which communities had power and which didn't. The weapons the Europeans traded for captives fueled wars that continued long after the ships stopped coming. And then colonialism arrived, exploiting the same destabilized, depleted societies the slave trade had helped to create. Ghana's population, which might have numbered in the tens of millions by 1900 had history gone differently, was instead recovering from centuries of extraction. Economic historian Nathan Nunn, in landmark research published in 2008, demonstrated statistically that the regions of Africa most heavily affected by the slave trade are, today, among the poorest and most politically unstable. The wound did not close. It compounded, and yet, Ghana remembers. The Ashanti still honor their ancestors. The castles are UNESCO World Heritage Sites, not as monuments to European achievement, but as witnesses to African suffering and African survival. Every year, people of the diaspora, from America, from the Caribbean, from the UK, walk back through that door of return. They come home to a home they never knew, to mourn people they cannot name. Ghana's history did not begin with slavery. It will not be defined by it, but it cannot be told without it. The village at dawn, the silence, the screaming. We must say what happened. We must say it plainly and fully, and with the names and the numbers and the weight that it deserves. Because the people who were taken, they had names. They had dreams. They had children who would never be born, songs that would never be sung, discoveries that would never be made. They were not cargo. They were us.
If the door of no return had never existed, if the slave trade had never reached Ghana's shores, how different do you think Africa would look today? Would the Ashanti Empire have become one of the greatest powers in the world? Drop your thoughts in the comments. This history belongs to all of us.